In Kentucky, we don't just take chances, we bet big. This month, I'm sitting down with 4 Kentuckians who made 4 bold moves and asking one question: what was the biggest bet that you ever took on yourself? This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Town & Country Ford. No matter where life's adventures lead you, Town & Country Ford is along for the ride. I'm going to go into psychology.
I probably would have gotten into the business world a lot sooner.
How did that experience help you pivot into the world of bourbon?
Learning to be self-reflective.
So what's the story behind the name?
You know, we both believe that you only live once.
What is the one thing that is happening in the bourbon industry?
We got engaged in Italy.
With those early years, how do you think that shaped your entrepreneurial spirit? Well, he traded a 20-year career in clinical psychology for a rabbit hole of a dream, redefined Louisville's skyline after that. Welcome to the Best Bet podcast, the man who proved that sometimes the best way to find yourself is to totally get lost in the spirit. Kaveh Zamanian joins me now on the Best Bet podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
Well, I always like to begin at the beginning, and I feel like this interview is happening at such a timely time in our world. Take us back to, you were born in Tehran and your family escaped during the 1970s to come to the U.S. I know that must be on your heart and mind right now, but with those early years, how do you think that shaped your entrepreneurial spirit?
Yeah, you know, I think the Iran that I was born into and grew up is very different than what a country that it's been for the last 47 years. You know, I grew up in a country where it was very Western. I went to an American school. My grandfather was actually one of the first people that imported tobacco and had a cigarette brand in Iran back in the day, and eventually got into the import-export business of European goods. And for me, that was really the kind of seed, if you would, for interest in business and entrepreneurship. On the other side of my family, a lot of physicians and folks that are in the healthcare business. So, you know, that side kind of directed me to becoming a psychologist eventually. But my heart was always in that business world, particularly remember fondly my childhood interactions and memories with my grandfather, who used to tell me all kinds of grand stories about his travels and business forays and things along those lines.
You probably feel like you're on the couch right now. Where
I love it,
digging
exactly.
into your psychological roots and everything. But I think that really that's very forming of a young person, you know, how they grew up, where they grew up, you know, your grandfather being your early influences. But when you were in the U.S., what led you to say, yes, you know what, I'm going to go into psychology. I want to go into talking to people and figuring out how they tick and helping them overcome certain things. Why that field?
Yeah, you know, I was really conflicted because I feel like if I was not going through some of the challenges of trying to figure out what it feels like to adjust to a new land, new country, new culture, and influences a little bit from my father, who is a physician, to go in that kind of more conservative path, I probably would have gotten into the business world a lot sooner. But I think all those kind of factors, particularly just trying to search within and figure out who I was, really was an easy kind of slide into psychology, because in a lot of ways, I think it helped me grow as a person. And I think that, you know, I had a professor who used to say that people that become mental health professionals definitely are seeking some self-healing themselves. And I think that was really true. And for me, that was a big part of it that was not really conscious, but, you know, I kind of slid into it, and I think in the long run it was really beneficial, because I couldn't have done what I'm doing without that experience, for sure.
How did that experience help you pivot into the world of bourbon?
You know, there's a couple of things. I think the first thing about psychology that is really important, it's an important lesson, is about learning to be self-reflective. I think if you're able to look at yourself and, good, bad, or ugly, do an assessment, take inventory, I think it's really an important lesson in terms of, you know, what you should be doing in life and what's ultimately important value-wise or otherwise. I think the other piece of it is the opportunity to be able to dream and really think about what is important in life. You know, a lot of patients that I saw over the years, for one reason or another, were really blocked when it comes to thinking about what they want in life. Or if they did know what they want, for one reason or another, really couldn't actualize it. So those kind kind of lessons either in classroom, out of the classroom, with patients, or as an instructor, as a professor, really allowed me to not only look at myself, but to be able to see other people. And those lessons were really helpful in letting me just kind of take the roadblocks away and think about what's really important in life.
So what came first, the bourbon business or the love of your life?
Definitely Heather. No, for sure. Heather is my wife.
Once you meet a Kentucky girl, it is all
I know.
over.
It's amazing. We actually have a group of guys who have married Kentucky girls. I think we're like numbers going north of 25 now. It's pretty incredible. It's a cottage industry, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, Heather and I met almost 23 years ago in Chicago, and I was a Scotch guy. I didn't really think a whole lot about bourbon, honestly. But she opened my eyes to bourbon, and when we started coming down here 22 years ago, when we first started dating, I just, through her experience, got exposed to so many really cool brands, especially brands that I'd never heard of, because they were basically Dusties that we were tasting, and I was just smitten.
You were known for closing a world-class facility and a practice that was very successful, and for just taking a jump and a leap and saying, I'm going to open a distillery. What was the moment in your life that made you decide that was the right way to go?
Well, it was a process, right? I think it started as an interest, as a kind of a hobby in some ways. But the more I got into it, the more I realized there's a real opportunity here. I grew up in California, high school and beyond, and I saw what happened to Napa, and that left an impression on me. So seeing what was happening here in the Commonwealth in the late 2000s, it really was eye-opening, because I felt like there's an opportunity here. So it slowly grew from a kernel, an idea, and eventually got to a point that I decided, if I'm going to do this, you really need to kind of go all in. And it's not just about sourcing and bottling, but really having a facility that's able to materialize what the vision behind Rabbit Hole is, and that's what it was.
See, you found that little bit of gap in the market, where I had another master distiller on, somebody actually with blending and brand development with blending. And I asked him, what was it about the business that made him feel welcome? And he said, actually, it can be kind of intimidating, because you think of a couple of brands and big families, and that's it.
Yeah.
And then you wonder, where is there space for me? And so when you looked outwardly on Kentucky and the bourbon business, what did you see that was like, wait a minute, that doesn't intimidate me. I see something lacking, and I see something that the public would be really interested in.
Yeah, there was a couple of things. I think the first thing was about the liquid. I think that the light bulb moment for me was when I realized that I can look at bourbon, and it just really, the quick summary of it, to me, bourbon is 51% corn, 49% possibility. And what that means is that, we know that it takes 51% corn to make bourbon. But there's 49% of other ingredients that you can play around with. And when I looked around other brands on the shelf, it just seemed like a sea of sameness to me. And there was a lot of kind of horse trading back in the days of distilleries swapping barrels, essentially just a handful of recipes. And to me, that was really the light bulb moment, because I felt like there's so much more room for creativity, and realized that bourbon is probably arguably one of the most creative, gives you the most creative landscapes when it comes to creating spirits. And I felt that the same way that the craft beer guys started really stretching behind, back in the day we had Miller, Butt, and Coors, and all of a sudden we have all these funky, recipes of beer going on. And I felt like there was an opportunity to do that on the liquid side with bourbon. And then the second piece was on the hospitality side of it. I thought that there's really so much room to showcase the Commonwealth, Louisville in particular for us, because it's our home, and bourbon and the art and science of making whiskey, that just felt like, as an outsider in particular, I can come in and tell a little bit of a different story, or provide a different vantage point to the experience.
So what's the story behind the name?
So the story is I was getting more and more obsessed with bourbon and talking about it and taking Heather to various distilleries and tours and talking about them. She used to say that I'm going to take the family down the rabbit hole with this crazy idea. And just to put it in perspective, at the time we have three kids, and at the time they were 7, 5, and 4. So she was literally thinking that I'm out of my mind because we had obviously a stable career, nice life, and all of a sudden I'm basically chucking all this to go down this crazy rabbit hole. But, in the end, it became a chuckle for both of us because she knew that, we both believed that you only live once, at least in this shape or form. And if you're going to do it, you have to support your partner to be able to at least roll the dice and see what happens. And I'm forever grateful that she was able to support me for that.
A dream that worked, but you also took the name with
That's
you.
right.
And you incorporated it really into so many aspects of the distillery.
Yeah, because this also ties back to the psychology piece of it. We all need to take a dive down. I think it's a creative process, and as a creative person, you never know where you're going to end up, but you got to take a chance. You got to take that leap. And we wanted the liquid to embody that, obviously the distillery to showcase it, and to use that narrative of Alice in Wonderland and that journey, and hopefully even inspire people to follow their dreams if they have one and they feel compelled to pursue it.
So you opened your doors in what, 2012?
So the company was formed in 2012, and
yeah.
What was really challenging at the time was without a distillery to find a distillery that makes my recipes for me. So I spent a couple of years fine-tuning whiskey recipes, learning what I need to do. And in 2014, we found a distillery that was able to make my recipes. So we did that, and then we started building the distillery that opened up in Louisville in 2018.
Okay, you got me curious now. So what goes into making a bourbon recipe? I imagine you in a kitchen trying to piece together a mash bill. It's like Mad Scientist meets Kentucky cooking.
Yeah, no, it's
right?
it's precisely like a chef in a kitchen. It's a culinary experience. You start with ingredients, tasting the different ingredients, and
And so, what are your ingredients?
Well,
in this case that you're tasting. For your
so
recipe?
you know what corn is going to give you, right? Corn gives you that basic sweet base that you want, and typically most Kentucky bourbons, you either have a high rye or a rye based or a wheat based. Rye gives you a little bit more sweet spiciness. Wheat gives you additional sweetness. But one of the things that I really enjoyed, and again, going back to the craft beer inspirations, is using a lot of different malted grains. So one of my first recipes was using, for example, honey malted barley, right? So there's lots and lots of different malting houses around the country, and they do exceptional work with different types of grains that are malted in different ways. So smoked pecan, for example, or dark Munich. So there's a lot of different kind of types of grains that you can bring in that they bring some certain accents. It's almost like spice off the spice rack. So you got the sweet base, and then you pepper in other ingredients for different kind of culinary experiences.
I'm learning that making bourbon is a lot like just being in the kitchen making a family meal.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And that's the way it was back in the day. That was the other piece that was really enlightening for me because, the first renaissance of bourbon was right after the Civil War. So between essentially 1864 all the way to Prohibition, there's at some point we had about 2,000 distilleries in Kentucky. And most of them were essentially just farmer distillers. And what they're doing is, in fact, most of them were probably women, actually, the same way that a lot of cooking happens, that were behind essentially the recipes and the ingredients. Over time, what happened through consolidation, a lot of changes in the industry, and the corporate kind of larger companies coming in, you saw that diversity of bourbon kind of making go away, and everything got streamlined, unfortunately.
Do you feel like it's part of your mission, your way to make sure that when people come to Rabbit Hole, that they understand a little bit more about the true bourbon industry and the people that built it?
Yeah, definitely. I feel that, we are essentially building on the foundation of amazing tradition here in the Commonwealth, but we're also trying to push the envelope a little bit. So the distillery is designed to showcase every step of the process, to really show the art and science of whiskey making. My creative direction to Doug Pearson, who was our architect, was I wanted to make bourbon making look sexy. That was one of the main lines.
Wow, tell me more. Yeah.
Like I want everything to be in full display. I want them to be able to, all the senses to be heightened. So when you're going into our atrium, for example, you're literally lifted off the manufacturing floor. So you're not disrupting the process or the folks that are working, but you're able to see, you're able to hear, smell, of course, and even touch and taste. So all the senses are heightened. And at the end, you're walking away having a little bit more of an appreciation for our native spirit.
So how many years into the business did you realize, oh, this is going to work?
Oh my God.
And was your wife asking you every day, honey,
I know.
is this going to work?
Yeah, honestly, I was on my hands and knees at night praying. I can't tell you for how long, because what also happened was, we put our own money in, and friends and family that were brave or stupid enough to join us early on. And then I had to hit the road and raise money. So I had about 110 investors. So there was a lot of folks that were banking on us.
It's like you're running for office.
Yeah.
I don't think people realize like how hard it is
Yeah.
to come up with an idea for a distillery, for it to be successful, and to raise the capital for it.
Yeah, well, especially.
They just think you're living off your trust fund.
Yeah, no, oh my
Right.
God. No, yeah, I mean, if you talk to folks like Fred Minnick, will tell you some of the strange stories that were swirling around back in the day because, no, there was, we had a nice middle-class family, but certainly not enough money to do something like this. And to go out there and try to, essentially convince people to support my idea was really not only daunting, but it was really challenging because at the time, honestly, there was not even a bank in the state of Kentucky that lent money to bourbon. So in 2012, believe it or not, there was not a single bank. I went to every single bank in Louisville, Kentucky, and nobody was was leasing or lending to the bourbon industry. In fact, I remember talking to the guys at Stockyard who are actually wonderful, wonderful folks. But I used to say to them, I go, you guys have lent money to the equine industry, for God's sake, and you're not lending to bourbon. And the reality was most of them really didn't understand or look at bourbon as a commodity. And it was much later than it started happening when there were some successes with Rabbit Hole, with Angel's Envy, and other brands really kind of showing what could happen and other companies coming in and acquiring us or wanting to acquire us. That venture capital came in, the banks opened up. But in those early days, there was not a single bank out there.
But we'll lend to the horse racing,
That's right.
and that's totally a gamble, literally a gamble. Like something may happen at any time. So much has been made about bourbon and talk about tariffs and talk about overproduction and talk about sitting in warehouses and talk about nobody consuming enough. What is the one thing that is happening in the bourbon industry, in your opinion, that no one is talking about, that is the next big way to go?
It's a great question. I think that right now is when the rubbers hit the road. And I think one of the things that is exciting is that we have had a really solid run with a lot of great craft distillers out there, in particular, phenomenal products that have been produced. I think that in the next 4 to 5 years, you're going to really see even more amazing products within the bourbon category coming out. It is a challenging time. There's no question about it. I think the market is soft. I think with tariffs and a lot of other things that are happening, the international market has slowed down. But I do think that, through this lull, we're going to come ahead with consumers really getting the best of the best. I think I've always said, actually, the best years of bourbon are ahead, not behind us.
To go back to my first therapy session with you, if you learn from your experiences, is this an experience in bourbon that was bound to happen that makes you be creative to pivot forward?
Yeah, I think so. I think the market really created an opportunity for craft distillers to come in and experiment and really push the envelope. I think it was about time. I think the consumers were just like, that's the way I approached it initially. I approached it as a consumer, and I was bored with what I was seeing on the shelf. And when I learned about the history of bourbon, I realized there's so much more that it can be. And that was really the opening for me. And I think I was certainly not the only person in that place. There was a lot of great craft distillers around the country that saw the same opening. And I think that's what's exciting about what's to come.
All right, I'm going to pause just for a moment, coming right back with Kaveh Zamanian. I grew up in a Ford family. My dad worked at the Louisville Ford assembly plant. And it wasn't just a brand for us, it was a way of life. And that's the thing about Ford, is that they're woven into a part of our culture here in Kentucky and across America. So no matter where life's adventures may take you, Town and Country Ford is along for the ride. Whether you're a neat sipper or a cocktail king, the ultimate pilgrimage is calling. The Kentucky Bourbon Festival returns to the bourbon capital of the world, Bardstown, Kentucky, September 10th through the 13th. Tickets go on sale soon. Mark your calendars for April and go to kybourbonfestival.com. Come on. Welcome back. I'm sitting down with Kaveh Zamanian. He is the founder of Rabbit Hole Distillery. Time now for our Kentucky Bourbon Festival sponsored question. You ready?
Absolutely.
All right. So if you are heading to the festival grounds this September, what is the one bottle of Rabbit Hole that you're bringing to share with the crowd, and why?
I would probably take a bottle of Derringer Founders Collection. I think it's one of those fan favorites. And the Founders is basically, it's our wheated bourbon that's finished in PX sherry casks for those who are not familiar. But what we do with the Founders, we end up actually aging them in barrels that have had sherry in their belly for anywhere between 30 to 40 years. So really, really, really special product. And it's just, if you happen to love Derringer, you like sherry cask finish, this is, I describe it as sherry cask finish on crack. It's just awesome.
You know, if you release something new, you know they'll come running to the gates.
Definitely. Yeah.
Right? Has that festival been essential and helpful for you to kind of get word out, and for other craft distilleries to get the word out about what they do?
I love that festival because it's really, truly a festival for the bourbon lovers. And what's been really exciting to see how that festival's come together over the last few years and it's expanded, and seeing people come to the Commonwealth and to Bardstown from all over the world. It's really, really exciting to see how geographically they've expanded their demographic.
So what is next for you? You're not just at Rabbit Hole, you're like your hands are in so many different things. Explain first, like, the different projects that you're involved in currently and what you think is going to be next.
Yeah, so We sold Rabbit Hole to Pernod Ricard 6 years ago now, five years ago. And one of the things about that partnership was the opportunity to be able to develop more brands and do more creative things. And in the last couple of years, developed a couple of brands. One is called Mary Dowling Whiskey Company. And the second is Mash and Mallow Whiskey Company. Mary Dowling is another bourbon brand, and Mash and Mallow is a s'mores flavored whiskey. And these were in joint venture brands.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been an exciting couple of years, joint venture projects with Pernod Ricard. And on the side, so my wife, who is also a psychologist, she actually got to a point last year where she basically said, look, you're having way too much fun. I'm going to close the practice, and I want to get in this business too.
What? She's going to go down the rabbit hole, so to speak,
she did
too,
in some ways.
own.
Yeah, you see, we got engaged in Italy and in Positano, and we've always had a soft spot for Italian products. And there was an opportunity to purchase a couple of Italian brands, and an aperitif brand and an Amaro brand. So she's basically purchased those brands, and I'm kind of supporting her now, as she's learning the industry. And it's been fun to have these joint venture brands with Pernod and then help her with her Italian brands as well, in addition to Rabbit Hole, of course.
What a wonderful next chapter.
Yeah, it's exciting.
I mean, right. Did she ever want to do entrepreneurial things too? Or did she get inspired by what you were doing? Because it's not just business that you're doing, it's creating something. It's so creative.
Yeah, no, I don't think she's naturally entrepreneurial. I think she's kind of gotten the courage over time. and realizing that she's got muscles that she could exercise that she hadn't exercised before. And it's exciting to be able to watch her do that.
You know what it goes back to?
What's that?
Our therapy
There you go.
session.
That's right.
It goes back to the dreams that we don't realize that we all have within
Yeah.
us, which is like the purpose of the podcast, is that people hear your pivot, your struggle, and who knows what person realizes, oh my gosh, like I have this dream in here. Why am I so afraid?
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
Like people think like that all the time.
Yeah.
And I think when they hear successful people, they realize, oh, that it was hard, but it was worth it.
Yeah, no, I think, you have to take a chance. And I think some people just innately are a little bit more conservative. But I think once you have an experience or you see someone who's been able to do it and, it's not the end of the world. Even if you fail, you're learning, you go from there. That really allows more courage to keep pursuing it.
What's the worst that can
Exactly.
happen? Right? My son's in college, so I'm asking him a lot of if he struggles with something, I'm like, well, what's the worst that could happen? You get a bad
That's
grade,
right.
you redo it. This is not life and
Well,
death.
it's actually the failures that are going to give you more courage anyway. I had 2 clothing businesses for like a minute back in the day just because, and they both failed miserably. But I learned a lot and I had fun in the process. And, when it came to bourbon, ultimately I have that experience in the background to say, all right, just like you were saying, it's not the end of the world. Worst case scenario is, you're out. That's it.
Worst case scenario, you find the best business of your life.
True.
Successful and retire in Italy.
There you go.
Done. Done. All right. Rapid fire round to wrap us up. You get the jet setter edition.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay. What pairs better, pork chop or fried chicken with Rabbit Hole Bourbon?
Pork chop.
Favorite city to eat in that isn't Louisville?
New Orleans.
You want to name a restaurant there? Your favorite?
Honestly, I go there every year and I can't give you a single restaurant.
There's too many.
of them.
There's too many. Sweet or savory?
Savory.
What's harder to be, a psychologist or a bourbon maker?
Oh my God, a bourbon maker. Yeah.
R&B or old school rock?
I would say old school rock.
What was the best advice your wife ever gave you?
Her best advice. She's given me a lot of advices and over the years. I am really impulsive, and her ability to be more patient has been really the balancing point. So I think the idea of just being able to be calm and patient has been the most important.
It's worked out pretty good
has.
for you. It has. Kaveh, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This was great.
Thank
This
you.
was great. Thank you so much for watching the podcast. No matter where you're watching this right now, please leave a review because that gets the word out about this particular podcast. So until next week, have a good one, everybody. Cheers.